Hey, CNFers, many of you know I love to crack open a beer on this podcast. Sometimes it contains booze, other times it doesn't. I've been selected as a brand ambassador for Athletic Brewing, a brewery that makes my favorite non-alcoholic beer. And if you use the promo code BrendanO20 at checkout, you get 20% off your first order. Head to athleticbrewing.com and order yourself, in my opinion, the best non-alcoholic beer you'll ever drink. I mean it. Also, I don't get any money. Full transparency. I get these points towards like merch and beer if I'd like, but no money. Go check it out.
Everything about it, everything about the movie that I love is about our inability to see ourselves and our ways in which we interact with the world that we're in. And that's the gift that I think the movie gives. And that's, what I'm at least trying to enact a little bit by spending a whole book writing about fucking Predator.
Oh, and wouldn't you know, it's CNF Pod, the creative nonfiction podcast, the show where I speak to badass people about the art and craft of telling true stories. I'm Brendan O'Mara. How's it going? Oh, man, today's guest, would you believe it? He's back. Anders Monson. He's the author of Predator, a memoir, a movie, an obsession. It is published by Grey Wolf. This book is up for a CNFE, a totally and utterly meaningless literary award brought to you by this little podcast that could. Brad Listy's Be Brief and Tell Them Everything is also going to be a finalist. Anders also is the author of Vanishing Point, Gnome Stories, and the founder, I think he's the founder, of the famous March Xmas essay tournament that you see on Twitter where they're dueling essays. Because that's a thing. Show notes to this episode and a billion others are at BrendanO'Mara.com. Hey, there you can sign up to my Up to 11 Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter. This is where it's at, CNFers. I hope it entertains, give you value, shows you some things that I've stumbled across on the internet that I think you'll entertain you. And you know what it really does? It sticks it to the algorithm, right up the algorithm's keister. If that's your thing, go ahead and sign up. Been doing it for a lot of years. First of the month, no spam. As far as I can tell, you can't beat it. Oh, Anders' book. Oh, it's so good. We get right into it. But I will add one more item. All right, at times, guests offer to tape sync their side of the conversation, meaning they only record their side. They have headphones on, a good mic, and they're recording either on a recorder or through a digital audio workstation on their computer, be it Hindenburg, which is what I use, or Audacity, or GarageBand, or maybe something else. And this interview, or Anders' audio, is a masterclass in the power of tape syncing. I try like hell to get people to record with good microphones and non-echoey rooms, and they largely ignore me. Anders stepped up his game, and you will enjoy the final product. It is so good. It's so nice on the ear, and it's going to, as Brad Listy says, that audio is going to age really well on the internet. It's so worth the effort if you can do it. So listen to Anders' audio here, and you'll be like, man, I'm gonna step up my audio game. So let's get after it, CNFers. Riff.
Pretty hyped about Predator, so
oh, man.
There's that.
Oh, that's great. This book was a trip. I had such a good time reading it. It was awesome.
Thanks. I'm glad to hear it. It's been nice to, it's been bubbling a lot like inside me for a really long time. So, and I've been talking about Predator and like this project for a really long time. So it's been a relief to kind of both get it out in the world and then also to start hearing back from people about their experiences with it, which has been cool.
I have it was a gift. I have a T-shirt that is Dylan and Dutch with their handshake, and it just says, "Dylan, you son of a bitch."
You son of a bitch. Oh yeah.
Yeah. I have a. I should have worn. Not that we can see each other, but I should have worn it as a uniform for this conversation. I just have a Metallica shirt on. Staying on brand,
nice.
But it's one of my favorite shirts, and it's certainly one of those all time classic movies too. It's just I remember one of the first times I saw it, it kind of freaked me out. It's like with the skull and the spine coming out, like it grossed me out. I was like, this movie's freaking me out.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a lot. Like I've been debating recently because my daughter, who's 8, she came to one of my events and she's like, okay, when can I watch Predator? And I'm like, well, you're 8. So I've been debating, but I told her she could watch it, but she's got to watch it with me.
Yeah.
And I think she'll be into it, but there's certainly some aspects of it that I think maybe a little bit of a tough sell, but she doesn't get scared. So, and what better person to watch it with than to watch it with your dad?
Yeah, like I said, I had such a good time reading it, and I got to say, like, published by Grey Wolf. I feel like Grey Wolf it's like the publisher for. It's kind of like not a hipster press, but it's one of those presses where it's like I think every writer secretly like wants to be published by them. It's just they seem to have that kind of cachet among writers.
Yeah. I mean, they've got such a great range of books that they publish. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, this book could have belonged somewhere else, but I worked pretty hard to make it in a way that Grey Wolf would say yes to it. And there's a little bit of a story behind that that we can get into because they said no to it a couple times before they finally said yes.
I think something you said a moment ago that kind of stuck out was that you talked about the project a lot with people and spouting it out, probably bouncing ideas off people, and now you're starting to get the feedback back. Does it help you to metabolize what you're working on by talking it out with some people, given that some people like to just kind of keep that close to the vest? I think like Hemingway never shared his shit with anyone. Like, do you find that it's like you definitely like to kind of share what you're working on?
I do sometimes, and sometimes I don't. I mean, I've regretted talking about, novels that I've been working on, which, are still not out in the world in the past. Because, you lose steam on things and then it's like, oh, what's up with that Labyrinth novel you're working on? I'm like, oh, yeah, still kind of working on it, but like in a slow way. But with Predator, I mean, for me, this book is like, it really is a communal book. It's about it is about watching it kind of myself, but it is about watching it with other people and talking about it with other people. So that feeling of talking about the book with other people who haven't often seen it, or especially if you have, has really been generative for me and it helped me understand that the way that I see Predator when I watch Predator is not necessarily the way that other people see or watch Predator, which was a decision that I kind of had to lean into pretty early on. Well, not pretty early on. I mean, maybe about 2/3 of the way through this process of kind of editing and rewriting the book was kind of deciding that I was going to call it a memoir. And because, I was trying to talk about like masculinity and gun violence and like American imperialism and like these big ideas that, I have some way of attacking, but I don't know really how to write about those. And then like when I realized, but I could write about Predator, which has those things in it, and kind of use that to open things up. And then when I realized that, I'm like, but the way that I'm doing it, I kind of have to offer myself as the medium on which this, the movie is being shown. And that helped. Like that, talking about it that way and like talking about what I see in the movie with people helped me discover that aspect of it, but also helped me discover kind of new things about the way that other people see and watch the movie too. I just had a Twitter conversation with somebody, this guy who wrote actually a really nice review for the LA Review of Books of Predator today. And I was kind of like reading it, and he kind of made the point in like a kind of subsequent tweet that there is, really the point that he's trying to make, which I think is also embedded in what I'm trying to get at in the book, is like, if you want to like I'm arguing for a bigger masculinity that can encompass more than I sort of understood that it could when I was 13, which is, a pretty small masculinity, obviously, that I kind of believed in then. And it's like, there is a moment in the movie, like, Dutch, Schwarzenegger's character, is a final girl in this movie. Like, he is hunted, everyone else is killed, and like that affect of it is like to be able to admit the sort of femininity, kind of like a received male gaze-ish femininity, but like a femininity, like into this like super butch, hardcore macho masculinity that otherwise the movie thinks it wants to be and like inhabit and to kind of model, is a pretty cool idea. But like an idea that I only came to on my 153rd viewing, which was a couple weeks ago, the night before the movie came out. And I was like, oh shit, he's the final girl. I wish I kind of knew, but I'm like, I didn't really know until that point. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. Like sometimes, like, it's a good work of art when you can discover something new about it with your 153rd time through it.
What struck me too about reading it was I wanted to get a sense of whether it was you wanted to write about Predator and the other themes emerged, or you wanted to talk about certain themes and then Predator became the vehicle through which you could structure the things that you were thinking about, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, both. It 100% did both, because I was trying to metabolize my response to the Gifford shooting. I mean, that was one of the real early moments, which I talk about in I Will Take the Answer. Like, there's an essay in there that book's kind of about that too. And it's starting to kind of spiral out into the stuff I was getting into with Predator. But like that moment where, she gets shot and I'm kind of in shock and I'm playing Fallout 3. I don't know if it was Fallout 3. I think it was Fallout 3, not Fallout 3 New Vegas. And I'm like just headshotting people with my sniper rifle as a kind of self-care. And I'm like, whoa. And I had to kind of step back for a second, like, what the fuck is that? It was like a really disturbing moment for me that I'm like, where did that come from? I mean, and it is like, it is self-care. Like, I actually find like that game in particular but all the Fallout series to be a kind of home and a homecoming when I play them. I feel very comfortable in that kind of sort of enacting that particular kind of violence that I'm playing on screen. And I'm like, okay, well, what's up with that? And then I was like thinking more about like, well, I mean, where do I get that from? And then, of course I was thinking about that for a long time, and things like January 6th happened. I'm like, oh shit. And all these like mass shootings keep happening. And I'm like, oh shit, like this is awful. But it's always these dudes. And like these dudes that are like, what makes them different than me? But like also like what did we all consume that like makes us this way? And I'm like, one of the things that we consumed, and like the thing that is maybe the most resonant cultural artifact, at least in my life, and the thing that I notice kind of hearing from the most people that I kind of run into, especially kind of dudes within 10 years or so of me, is Predator. And I'm like, whoa, like what is it about that? Like, why is that in the movie that keeps getting quoted, that keeps coming back? And that's when I really started to rewatch it. I mean, I'd seen it probably 30 times up to that point. But then I started to rewatch Predator when I was like, disc golfing, and this guy's like, get to the chopper, and someone else is like screaming like another quote, and I'm like, whoa, like this has become a kind of like a lingua franca of like guys, and like why that movie versus like any one of the other 100 of those movies that I saw, and you start watching it, you're like, oh, because this is like legitimately a great movie, and is trying to satirize these movies and is trying to take the piss out of gun violence and all this other stuff. And I'm like, okay, so now Predator is the vehicle that I'm going to ride going deep into this thing. And it allows me access to talk about some of that other stuff that I would have had a hard time coming at directly.
Did it help you to structure the book almost as if we're watching it with you, and then you're able to go on these exploratory tangents while you have the linear spine of the movie going throughout the whole book?
Yeah. And that was a late decision. So this is after, so I'd sent this book to Grey Wolf. I'd originally started writing it as poems. Like poems, usually in the voice of Predator, but not always. There's like a couple poems kind of in the voice of other, like characters like this sort of stuntmen in the movie that get blown up and you kind of see them flying into a pool. And I like kind of writing those, but I really liked writing as the Predator, which is the thing that most people like about the Predator. Like when people cosplay this stuff. They cosplay Predator. They don't cosplay Dutch or any of the other guys. They want to be the Predator, which is the movie. The movie offers us that with its, and we see through its POV. So I think it's inviting that. But so like I was writing these poems. I'm like, these are the best poems I've ever written. I love these poems. No one else really seems to like these poems. But I'm like, this is obviously a book. So I wrote this book, sent it to Grey Wolf. Grey Wolf's like, yeah, that's a no. Really a hard no. I think I took it as a hard no. And I'm like, okay. And I tried to shop it around elsewhere. They're like, yeah, that's a no from a number of other places. So I'm like, okay, going back to the drawing board. Like, what if they're essays? Like, what if I take the line breaks out, which is what I started to do. And then I published several of them as essays. I'm like, actually, these work pretty well as essays. Which maybe says something about the quality of them as poems. If they kind of work as well or better as essays, maybe they weren't really that good poems. And the people that were telling me that I should listen to, maybe. But I'm not good at listening to people sometimes. So okay, so I rewrote it as these kind of lyric essays that were pretty intense, and they were usually essays that were responding to a shot in the movie. I would have like a screenshot of the frame from the movie because I watched it frame by frame at one point, and I would be like kind of writing out of and into these moments. And so I did a whole version of this. I'm like, all right, this rules. I love this. Send it back to Grey Wolf, to my editor, and she's like, yeah, that's a no. But it was kind of a qualified no. And it's like, she's like, I think you've kind of followed yourself down a rabbit hole and don't know how to get out. And one of the pieces of feedback I heard from Fiona McRae, who was then the publisher of Grey Wolf, and who's, maybe I think she's a good reader in the sense that she's a little skeptical of some of like what I'm interested in doing. So I'm always trying to kind of convince her, in my mind anyway. And her feedback was like, I don't know if you love this movie or hate it. And I'm like, shit. I've really failed if it's not obvious, like both. Like, I love the movie, but I'm hurt by it. And you can only engage with something this intensely if you love it. But I've failed if that's not clear. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to take this whole thing back and I'm going to rewrite it from scratch, like not using a sentence from the original. And what I realized at that point was that maybe what I do need is like a really simple narrative framework, and which is now like, let's just watch the movie together. And when I figured that out, I'm like, okay, this is much easier because then we can also watch it together. There is like a little more of like, I'm your tour guide to the movie. And if you haven't seen the movie, then it's an easier access for you to kind of get into the book. And if you have seen the movie, then, you can take your own experience, but like sit down with me and watch it. And that made it way easier because then I could structure it. I mean, the structure is obvious. Like let's the plot of the movie, we walk through the movie and then we take these side quests. So I feel like the simplicity of that narrative structure is the thing that allows for the kind of like elaborateness of some of the side quests that I go on. So that, you kind of need that. You need that strong narrative pull through, I guess, to kind of like give me the ability to do some of the, I'm kind of wandering pretty far off the path of the movie. And I don't think it worked before I had that kind of strong central narrative framework. Long answer to a short question, but one I thought a lot about, like revising this book. And then I sent that back to Grey Wolf and they're like, oh yeah, this rules. Yes. I'm like, hell yes, finally.
Yeah, I love that because this is weird. I've probably only seen the movie beginning to end once, but I've probably seen the whole movie a bunch of other times, just like piecemeal whenever I caught it on TV. You just land on it and be like, okay, well, I guess this is what I'm doing for the next hour, and just like watching the rest of the movie, and knowing certain plot points and beats and famous things throughout the book. I remember as I was reading the book too, having some sort of an experience with it. I'm like, oh, I can't wait until Ander gets to this part of the movie because I can't wait to hear how you riff on Billy doing this thing, standing on the bridge, or Old Painless and Jesse Ventura's character. I'm like, all right, what's he going to do with this? Because I know he's going to get there, but it's like, what's he going to do with those ingredients and how is he going to cook with them once he gets there? Like, that was part of the fun for me.
Yeah. And that, I mean, it has so many of these iconic moments that are super memorable, and they're kind of the set pieces of the movie. And then there's a bunch of stuff that even I kind of don't remember sometimes. Like when I watch the movie, I'm like, oh yeah, there's that little bit. But you're kind of waiting to get through the big kind of moments. And like the Billy one is still, it's still like it's one of the few mysteries that are, for me, unresolved. Like, I don't know why he dies off screen. Mm-hmm. I've wondered this for years. And I mean, you know, I've got theories about it, but like, I have no idea. Like, all the other characters die on screen. They get an on-screen death. And I don't know if that's because he is that respect that we're paying him? Because he's a character that, especially in the novelization, he's like way deep in like this like spiritual psychological experience. And in the movie he is too. I mean, he's the only one that kind of knows that they're fucked and knows there's something else out there. So is it like, you know, I mean, are we paying him respect by not seeing him like disemboweled in a cool way? Or is it like racism? Like, cause he's the only character we don't get to see die this way? Or is it just like a function of money? Like, you know, they ran out of money and it's like, you know, let's have him die off screen so we don't have to do the effects we need to do for that scene. And I really hope there's an answer out there to this question, and I don't know what it is. And I feel like McTiernan may be the only person, or like, you know, John and Jim Thomas, the screenwriters, they may be the only people that can answer this. You know, that's why I hope that like the book will eventually find its way to one of them, and maybe I'll get my chance to kind of ask this question somewhere down the line. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, that it perplexes me, and it's great for there still to be mysteries in the film, even after like 150 times through. Like, I remember like there's this, and this is in the book, but like when I was watching, this was in the 100-something time, and I finally got like the joke that I think Hawkins makes. It's Hawkins or Poncho that makes in the helicopter where like, you know, Blaine's like, I'm a sexual Tyrannosaurus. And then, you know, and then Hawkins, I think it's Hawkins, it says like, you know, why don't you strap that on your sore ass, which is like a fairly dumb and pun joke thing. But I'm like, oh my God, I finally got this moment in the movie, like the 100+ time through. And so it's like, yeah, I mean, again, still secrets are there. There are still things that I need to find my way to.
Yeah. And I love the exploration that you make about how at first it's an action movie and then it makes a pivot. You know, in the, especially, there's only really the one super corny action hero line of Arnold's character Dutch when he throws the machete against the guy. He's like, stick around. Like, it is such a hilarious line, and the look he has on his face too when he does it is priceless. But it's I love those explorations you take about like with this movie. It starts as one thing and then it does make a turn. It's like, we need to get some of these action tropes out of the way so we can maybe get to the story we really want to tell.
And I think I found that fascinating as I thought more and more about this movie, but also like about like the nature of action movies and rewatching a whole bunch of the other ones. You know, I mean, I set myself the task of rewatching pretty much all the Schwarzenegger movies, which are for the most part a real pleasure, although there's a few duds in there. And then like thinking a little bit about like many of them just kind of reside in their genre and they're easy and they're fun and you could, you know, I mean, they're good movies to watch on the treadmill. They're like, you're kind of reminiscing while you're watching. And then there's movies that are really trying to do something else that, you know, start out with one thing and become something else and then become something else. And those are the ones that I'm most in love with. I mean, that I think really last for me. And I don't know the degree to which that is a function of just the kind of Hollywood system. Like, you know, you get money to make a quote unquote action movie, but really you have these ideas you want to point out about like the pornography of gun violence. And then, so it's like, sure, we'll have these guys like shoot at cock level into the jungle for like a minute and a half. And like a way that, you know, and then when some people watch that, they're like, oh, that's fucking awesome. Because it is fucking awesome. And then, but when you realize it, it's like, actually it's impotence being enacted on the screen. And I'm like, oh, there's more to that than I thought there was. And then you can see like, yeah, I mean, McTiernan was really trying to do something else with the movie that, but you have to make compromises. You got to have the big action sequence early with a bunch of blowing up shit and all the cool stunts in order to maybe to kind of like get people into the part of the movie that you're more interested in. And he didn't even like direct like half of that, like the scene in the guerrilla camp that's done by like the second unit. And it has like a very different kind of feel to it. And he's kind of shitting on it. If you listen to his like director's commentary on like the Blu-ray that I have, he's just not that interested in that part of the movie at all. And I'm like, that's super weird. Like, you think of it as he made this movie, but of course it's this collaboration with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other people who all have their own agendas and their own skill sets that like, so when you read the piece of art, you're like, oh, like this really is the product of a struggle and, and also collaboration. Like, I mean, it is like the manly handshake, like everyone's got their own thing they're trying to do. Joel Silver's screaming for more blood. Schwarzenegger, I'm sure, just wants to look fucking awesome as he does. Yeah. And he's great. I mean, he's so great in this movie. You could see like why he's wonderful, but like, yeah. And then, and the screenwriters are trying to do their thing. And you're like, okay, you can get all these different messages that coexist in the same artwork. That was kind of a useful, I guess, like way of like training myself to look at movies. Cause I don't know how to make movies. I've never made movies. Like this is not a form that I come at with an understanding of like what it's like to do it. I come at it from like a real nerdy, I'm going to watch it a lot and try to understand aspects of it that like aren't maybe not apparent to me. But like if you've been involved in movies, like your relationship to this one has got to be really different than mine is. It's as a 13-year-old viewer watching it for the first time.
Speaking of creative decisions, it makes me wonder, with the manly handshake scene, it's like, because Arnold's got like ungodly biceps, and so does Carl Weathers, for that matter. Yeah. But it's just like the camera angle we see Dutch, we see Arnold's bicep more than we see the outer side of Carl Weathers, and we see like the really like charismatic side of Arnold's bicep, and it just makes you wonder, like, all right, that's like, oh well, main character flex right here, like literal main character flex. You get the greater shock. I imagine they probably shot it from any kind of angles, but that was the winning one.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that was, if you listen again to like, there's a little kind of featurette about the making of Predator that's on one of the DVD Blu-ray things that I have. And I mean, I think, you got a bunch of these like hyper macho dudes all trying to film this thing, and they're all like going to the weight room constantly and like getting jacked and working out. And like Schwarzenegger kind of explains, like, a lot of what he brings to the table as an actor, you kind of see in an earlier, I don't know if you've seen Pumping Iron, this kind of like scripted documentary, which is wild. I never saw that until like a couple months ago. And I'm like, holy shit, great movie to watch. But you see him and you're like, oh man, this guy's a star. But like, he also like really brings out the kind of friendly competitiveness in like all of his competitors.
Like poor Lou Ferrigno in that movie.
Oh God. Yeah. It's so brutal. I mean, but so fun to watch. And so he kind of punks, I think, Jesse Ventura at some point in Predator. Like they were having some like, I don't know, some cocking where they're trying to like, each trying to outdo each other with how big their biceps were. And like he got someone to report like a fake size to Ventura and Ventura like put a bunch of money on it. And then Schwarzenegger, of course, showed up and like outflexed him to a degree. And, but like that's kind of great. I mean, that like feeling of camaraderie and friendly competition, I guess I sort of interpret as mostly friendly competition, because all these guys are jacked as hell, like is part of the fun of the movie watching it. Like you get the sense they really enjoyed making this movie and they really liked working with one another. That I think is partially why it like lasts as well as it does against some of those other action movies of the era.
And a part of this book, too, that I found really fascinating as kind of a recurring character, if you will, was Paul Monet's novelization of Predator and how you pull that in. Just talk a little bit about that, when you discovered the novelization, and then, what a creative joy that must have been to be able to talk about him at length and fold in the novelization to help sort of cement a lot of the arguments and just bolster the story you wanted to tell here through the movie and through the memoir?
So I discovered Manette in a grad school workshop where we were reading books of elegies, and we read his book Love Alone, among a bunch of other really good but also like depressing books, because they're all books of elegies. And someone gave a presentation in that class, and it was like, Love Alone, and they're great poems, like really like raging, angry poems that he wrote for his lover who was dying of AIDS, or who had just died of AIDS, or he was in the kind of last stage of that, which the government would, of course, not even admit was a thing. And so one of the bullet points on the handout was, and he also wrote the novelization for Predator. And I'm like, okay. Like, I mean, that's kind of interesting. And, you're in grad school, so it's also like a bunch of people trying to kind of flex on each other
right.
with like how they like the most fancy shit, who read the most Lacan, or who read like the most Demand or whatever. And this was kind of my experience in grad school a little bit, and I was not the most successful one at this, of course. And then later, like a long time later, and I was rewatching Predator, and like what came back was that Paul Manette had written the novelization for it. And I'm like, what? Mm-hmm. And so then I'm like, I got to track down this novelization, which I, found online someplace for like, I don't know, $20. And I read it, and I'm like, because like, he would go on to win the National Book Award in nonfiction for Becoming a Man, like his one of his two memoirs, the first one, which is also very much about the death of his lover and his anger about the government's unwillingness to even acknowledge HIV and AIDS. And so I'm like, well, what did this gay man who was kind of attuned to men's bodies in a different way than I am, what did he see in this movie? So I read their novelization, and I really liked it. I mean, it was kind of partially clunky, but a lot of it was just really well written, because he's, a good poet and knows his way around beautiful images and these great lines, and also does a bunch of weird shit that's not actually in the movie, because it was based on a kind of early script. So there's a lot of stuff that varies radically from the movie that's pretty interesting if you get into like the kind of like cosmology of the kind of Alien versus Predator universe. But then I was rereading it, and I'm like, and again, he sees men in a particular way that like, and the more I thought about it, the more it occurred to me that there really is, I mean, there's like a certainly very homosocial, if not outright homoerotic aspect of this movie that is really present when you watch it in 2012 or 2022. That was there, I wouldn't have noticed in the 80s. And I was rewatching it. I'm like, oh man, there's so much of this homoerotic tension in this movie that's built in. And it really does become, like looking at that and then looking at Paul Manette's story, you have these twin narratives of these guys being hunted by an invisible predator, denied by the government, seen as expendable by the government, dying out there in the jungle, or, in America, in the case of gay men who died of HIV and AIDS. And I'm like, oh shit, there's a lot of really interesting, overt, I think, relationships between the movie and between his story. And the more I got into it, the more I read of his work, the more he became a character, admittedly one that I don't have access to. He died, some years ago. So I spent time then trying to develop him as a character and bring him in and kind of wonder more about how he experienced the movie. And, he was actually writing this thing at his lover's deathbed. Literally, he's working on it next to it, which is a wild thing to think about. And then when you think about that then I started thinking about, okay, well, why is the only song in the movie Little Richard? This song that is not about straight men in any way. It's about Long Tall Sally, who is long and tall and bald and sneaking around in an alley with Uncle John. And you're like, okay, this is like not a straight song at all. But this is the song that they choose, the guys choose, like they're playing it on the boombox in the chopper. This is the only song in the fucking movie. Yeah. And I'm like, that's wild. Like, I don't know how intentional it is that there are these overtones, that they're kind of there. But like when you start to see it, it's really hard to unsee these moments that you could read in a really queer way. And they give me a lot of pleasure also to kind of point out to the guys on the internet who love this fucking movie and who like have kind of built big parts of their personality around this movie that the whole time is saying masculinity and big guns is not enough. Y'all are going to get killed by an alien. Like, I mean, it makes you a target. That's the point of the movie, or a big part of it. But like, man, to try to point out to these guys on like YouTube or that like the thing that they're watching maybe is a little gayer than they thought it was, is like a very satisfying feeling for me to think about. And it's also, and then I start to think about like the ways in which, you know, we like feel like we own or some aspect of our personality is articulated by this piece of art that we have really strong feelings about. And then the kind of problem with the sort of masculinity that's small enough that can't accept other ways of seeing the thing that like you love, and to understand it doesn't make it like less, I don't know, straight or butch or hardcore to see all this other stuff happening in the movie. And I'm kind of entertained by people that get like angry about that in there. And that kind of becomes a subject in here. I'm like imagining them finding this book and getting pissed about it. And I'm sure I'll get some reviews by some of these guys. And if I don't, like, I feel like I've kind of failed. Like, I mean, like I kind of want it. So I hope that it finds its way to them. And what I really hope is that they will, you know, like if you love Predator, that reading my book will maybe let you see it in a different way and maybe even let you see yourself in a little different way, which is what the movie does. It lets you see yourself. I mean, it lets us see ourselves through the alien's eyes. And that's my hope for what the book can do. Probably it's not going to do that for most people, but you know, if it can do that for some, I'll feel like I've succeeded.
It's what amazes me too, is that, you know, with the movie like that and Little Richard's song, like from 1986, whenever the movie came out, or like that was always there. And what amazes me about art, be it books or movies, sometimes those things reveal themselves over time, and it blows my mind that they were there all along. And like that song has been there all along, and then it was just there for someone astute enough to realize, like you say in the book, like they are electing to play the song in the chopper, like this is on their boombox that they play on a loop to get fired up for their missions. And then you dive into the meaning of the song. You're like, oh, okay, here there are layers here. There are multitudes to Predator.
Yeah, and that's I mean, it's a thing that I know from, you know, especially rereading books.
Yeah,
like, you know, that if you read a book that you read when you were 20 and then you read it when you're 30, it's usually a pretty different experience.
Totally.
And it's like a thing that hasn't happened maybe with me in movies that much, but it totally makes sense because like everything is embedded in the movie. Everything of the time and the culture that produced the art thing is embedded in the art thing. And sometimes you can only see that from a ways away, which is one reason, like, you know, when we do like these March Xmas tournaments, which are, I think, I don't know if we talked about this last time, but like these tournaments like that are basically about writing about music and memory and culture. Like the one rule that we have for those is it has to be at least 10 years old, because I don't think we can see the moment that we're in, or I'm not smart enough to be able to see the moment that we're in a way that is illuminating enough. Or maybe I should say the only way for me to illuminate the moment that we're in and what I see in it is by looking at stuff from 20, 30 years ago. It's just so much easier to see the culture when you've moved away from it in various ways, positive and negative, many positive, but like you need that space and time to be able to really see the thing.
Yeah. And I love how you brought up invisible threats. And that was like, threat was my word, but you said invisible things. And I have that in my notes, invisible threats. You know, you talk about the, you know, HIV, but you also bring up, you know, climate change and there are some other things too. invisible things that are that manifest in the predator, who they cannot see, who is their invisible threat manifest in the movie. And I was just like, I wanted to get your sense of how was this idea of invisible threats like on your mind as you were synthesizing this book?
I mean, it was major because and I think this is because it's a sci-fi movie. Like all the best Schwarzenegger movies are his sci-fi movies, or I guess fantasy. I mean, you got to include Conan the Barbarian because that's like a really awesome movie. Yeah. But I mean, all the best ones for me are the ones that have this other kind of subject matter, like Total Recall for sure, and The Running Man, I think are certainly going to round out the top 5. But those, I mean, these stories, sci-fi especially, wants to kind of have us look at aspects of ourselves and of the things that we do from the perspective of some future or from the perspective of an alien or whatever. And I think that's really important to think about. I mean, Predator's it's a movie about hubris. It's a movie about, it's like an anti-colonial movie. It's like an anti-technology movie. Like it's certainly an anti-gun movie. Like all guns do in this movie is make you a threat for the predator. And it's like, these things that exist in the world that we think of as giving us an advantage or making us who we are really of no note. Like, I mean, you're just going to get looked at harder by this thing that's even more badass than you, because there's always something more badass than you. And to not be able to see, to see ourselves is kind of the problem and the effects that we're having on the world. And that was what was really funny about watching, especially Predator 2, because there's the whole beginning of that movie is it's the future. It's LA. It kind of sees the LA riots coming actually. And it's like, okay. And it's in the future. It's really hot. Things keep getting hotter. It's like, and it's like, okay, that you were 100% correct about that. And there's an interview with Gary Busey, who's one of the stars of that one. And he's like, it could easily be 100, 110 in the future. We don't know. And it's like, yeah, pretty prescient, man. And it's like, the hotter you get, the more the predators come, which is canon to the series. It's like they come in the hottest years. So there's so much of this that I feel like, I don't know if the movie and then the other movies in the series and the franchise just sort of saw before other people did, or if you just got lucky, it was in the culture then and people weren't thinking about it the same way that they are now. But there's everything about it. Everything about the movie that I love is about our inability to see ourselves and our ways in which we interact with the world that we're in. And that's the gift that I think the movie gives. And that's, what I'm at least trying to enact a little bit by spending a whole book writing about fucking Predator.
Yeah, there's a chapter kind of in the last, 20% of the book too, where you kind of turn the camera on yourself in a sense, where you're just interrogating yourself, almost asking the audacity you have to even assert some of the things that you're even writing about. It's just how interesting do you think your life is to write about yourself this much? And then you go on, it's very short, it's about a page long chapter, but it's the self-interrogation that comes towards the end. And I wonder what was the sort of the motive of that, of positing all those questions to yourself and wondering, almost who the hell do you think you are to even come this far?
Yeah, I felt very important to me. And that's a piece. I don't know if I would ever read that at a reading or performance or whatever, because it really does, it's speaking some truth to power, the power being me. And that was what I started doing was, I'd start writing these poems in the predator's perspective. And one of my favorite ones was there was this Predator Masters convention, which shows up in the book in a different way now, where all these guys who quote unquote hunt apex predators come and have their convention at this taxidermy museum in Tucson. And they just go out and shoot coyotes and stuff in the desert, which fucking blows. It's a cowardly thing to do, is where I really come down on it. I come down in the place that Jesse Ventura does when he was running for governor. And he's like, he was a Navy SEAL, and he was pissing off, and he would say things like in the press. He's like, it's cowardly to shoot at things that can't shoot back at you. And in Minnesota, where everyone deer hunts and so on, but he's kind of right. Is like that is a different proposition than actually going to like kill a thing that can kill you back. So you have these guys out there shooting in the desert with their like AR-15s, and then and I'm like, okay, what would the Predator think of that? And the Predator's not impressed, of course. And once you start doing that, I had a bunch of these other Predator versus things, because like that's part of the franchise too, right? I mean, like when they like do Alien versus Predator, and then it's like, okay, Predator can go fight anything, which is really fun. It's a really fun exercise, like narratively and in movies and comic books. And then Predator fights Archie and like the girls, Veronica and Betty, which is actually a really great graphic novel. So, and then I had one where the Predator's like, what if the Predator is in like Alison Bechdel's Fun Home? Like where there's no threats that it just like knows how to deal with at all. It's all like emotional and passive aggressive and psychological. And I'm like, what would happen? Like, if you put him in that, he just like gets freaked out. And so as part of that, I'm like, well, like, what does the Predator think looking at me, like this asshole, like who's spent all this time watching this movie about the Predator? And it felt like a fair thing to do. And also a kind of important moment for me to, especially if I'm going to be writing about these things and trying to register the ways in which they hit me then and now and ongoing, then I felt like I did need to, aim the Predator at myself for a little bit to feel like I'm being honest about the experience, even if it's painful. And I do find that to be painful. It's not one of the pages that I like to reread, but it felt important to have it in there. Because it's when I sent, I don't know which, if you got one of the versions of the book that has like the VHS slipcase on it, that we did a couple of, I did like these like kind of wild VHS slipcases that went out with some pre-orders, and Grey Wolf has a few of them. And if I'll send you one if you don't have one, but it's like me photoshopped on the face of Dutch on the cover of the movie Predator, which I couldn't have had as the cover for the book because I would have got sued back to the Stone Age. But like when I put this together and I sent it to my brother, and my brother's like, yeah, I see you as more of a Hawkins, like not a Dutch. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I mean, that's a fair point. Like I'm not a Dutch, but like no one wants to see themselves as a Hawkins or a Poncho in this movie. Like you want to see yourself as like one of the big guys, if not the Predator. And it's like, yeah, I mean, that's the reality of my life. Like I'm not as hardcore as I would like. And I'm also someone that wrote a book, which is kind of trying to take some shots at memoir as a form. So I'm really aware that like, when I'm calling this a memoir, that I'm kind of coming back into conversation with Vanishing Point, which is explicitly not a memoir. And part of that is I think, okay, like who am I to be writing this memoir? Is a question that I would have asked myself in Vanishing Point, and I think I did. And so I felt important to kind of have that echoed here.
Yeah, what I love about it in terms of its form as memoir is that it really it doesn't have those like scene-driven elements. The scenes that we see are the scenes of like you watching the movie. It's almost like it is a memoir of you watching the movie, and you go off on these spurs, and it has a very it's voicey in the best possible way and not very, showy. It's very telly, but in a way that really flexes the tell element, where oftentimes we're told to show, don't tell. But I feel like this is a great exercise in the power of telling in a memoir.
And I mean, I think that's the thing that, my understanding of memoir has changed over the past decade or so. And understanding that really the eye is meant to be the instrument and not the subject. And the instrument, can be voice to me is really important reading memoir. Like that's kind of the only reason that I'm there, is for the quality of that lens that we're seeing through, not at like the plot of what we're seeing, which is not super important. And like, when I started looking at my life, aspects of my life through this particular lens, I'm like, yeah, actually, there was some pretty fucked up stuff that happened. And, I don't spend a lot of time dwelling on it normally, but I'm like, these are the things that I think really made me a fertile field for Predator to till. I don't know if that's maybe not the best way to use the metaphor, but it's like, what opened me up to this movie that it like felt that it feels so deeply embedded in me. And like trying to unpack some of that seemed important. And I also kind of like the idea of it being a memoir that's basically you're watching a movie with me. It's a memoir of watching a movie that I find funny. So if you're looking for like, I don't know, I have one person that I know who's read pretty much all of my work. She was like, yeah, it really wasn't that memoir-y. Like, I feel like I knew most of these things that showed up in other ways in your other work. Like, where are my revelations about your personal life? And I'm like, I feel like there's plenty in here, but it's not that kind of memoir. Like, it's a memoir that's trying to use me as the instrument through which we can watch Predator, and you could sit with me on the couch or next to me, maybe with the bro seat between us in the theater, or not, depending on our feelings about that. And so like that felt important. And also like it was a way to kind of tweak what a memoir is. Like that, I like to play with forms. So I like that idea of it's a memoir, but it's not exactly a memoir.
Yeah, there's a moment early in the book where I just love this little paragraph where you write, I believe that if you look hard and long enough at what you loved best at 14 and how you lived then and what you saw in the world, it will reveal both the world and you, or maybe you'll exhaust it, or it'll exhaust you. And I love that little that moment in this book of how you latched onto something early on, and here's something that you've been digesting for decades now.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a position paper for a lot of what I believe that nonfiction can do. And I guess also fiction and poetry. But that it doesn't matter what it is. Like everyone's got their predator, and you may not know that what you have is your predator, but like everyone has that. And if you look closely enough, there's the Bruce Weigel poem that I quote in here, which I've quoted before. I just really like that poem. Say it clearly and you make it beautiful no matter what. Like there is that. If you look closely at it, it will reveal you and you will reveal it. And that's the job. And I really love reading books like this, like that are sitting down and like looking at a thing or playing a game or listening to an album, or watching a movie to some degree, although I read fewer of those. But I really like that, like the idea of like experiencing another work of art with someone else. Because you get to experience both that work of art and the someone else and kind of see like what it brings out of us. Because I think sometimes like the things that it brings out of us are not the things that we would have thought it would have, that we would have anticipated going into it. And that's the magic of paying close enough attention to a thing to let it reveal you. That's the magic. And that's something I really recommend. And it's a lot of how I teach nonfiction is trying to get the other, like my students to trust themselves enough to be able to commit to the thing. Because if you commit to it, like you will eventually start to go inside it and start to lose yourself and then start to find yourself again.
When I was growing up, like my mom had a very sort of demure way of saying, like, don't, telling me like, don't rock the boat, if things are bugging you, just kind of, it's best to just kind of push it down. Like that's what her father told her, and as a result, it didn't work out well in that sense.
Where are you from? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Massachusetts, about an hour south of Boston. She grew up in New York, and I bring this up because a couple years ago I asked Elisa Gabbert when her latest essay collection came out, and I asked her just about the convictions through which she was making assertions in her book of like, what's that like? She's like, well, what's it like to have a thought? I'm like, well, no, like I was someone who just wasn't a cultivated muscle in me. So I'm always admire people who can really make these brilliant, assertions and put them on the page and really stand by it, and they're just so beautifully articulated. And I think I translated what I was trying to say to her at the time, and I think she kind of walked away. I think she was like thought I was being critical of her, like having thoughts. I'm like, no, I like admire that you could, and like in this book too, you even say like how like basically saying how is it that you even think you're interesting enough to have these assertions? And you just said something when you're talking to your students, teaching them how to trust themselves. So basically what I'm trying to ask is like, how did you learn to trust yourself to be able to go out on that limb and to have these assertions and put them on the page and stand by what you say, be it, interpretive or comic or whatever?
It's a really good question. And it's a thing that I've developed over a pretty long time. It was the hardest thing for me to learn when I started writing what I understood as nonfiction. Because my understanding of what nonfiction was people that are important and have thought a lot about a subject or are deep experts in the subject writing about their inaccessible to me experiences as an expert. And they're all like old and white, because that's the only people I'd read in nonfiction. And that's the way that to the degree we had a canon, that was the canon, was like these old white guys like talking about shit that they seemed very knowledgeable about. And it took me a while. I mean, a lot of my experience with nonfiction has been exploratory and trying to give myself the rope on the leash to kind of go out there and find out like what I actually think about stuff. I remember there was a moment when I was copy editing my first book of nonfiction, which is Neck Deep and Other Predicaments. And at some point my editor was like, okay, so you seem to say maybe or perhaps or I think a lot. And it's like, maybe take a look at all those and cut them all, because it's implicit in what you're doing. And there's a lot of qualification that you're making about a lot of the assertions, because I didn't know shit. I still don't really know shit, but to kind of learn to not qualify those. To understand that, it's an early draft thing that I can venture a thought. And then in the next draft is like, okay, I actually feel pretty good about that thought and I'm willing to kind of stand by it. And so maybe I'll cut the bits that kind of are me tiptoeing out to the ledge. And in Vanishing Point, I had a kind of other solution, which was I knew there were things in that book that I didn't trust what I said or thought about at the moment of writing. And so I kind of put these glyphs in the book on certain words that then if you type the words into my website, they would bring up like additional content, like more evolved thinking, or like me coming back to like think more about this idea later. And I like that idea of like creating this kind of unstable I that knew it was unstable in these ways, and so kind of made a space for me to continue thinking about those ideas. And the more I got into then, I guess like writing about stuff that maybe seemed beside the point or like below other people's attention. Like, there's not many people writing about Predator. Although, there's actually been a decent number of people thinking about the franchise since Prey came out, the latest kind of iteration of it. And because it's the 35th anniversary, there's been some people writing about it. But when I was writing about it, nobody was writing about it. Everyone's like, why are you writing about this like crappy Schwarzenegger movie? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't have an answer except that I'm compelled to do it. And the more that I did that, the more I felt strongly that Predator held all the answers, or at least held all the ways of articulating the questions that I wanted to ask. And so, once you do it for a while, you're like, okay, I guess I got to commit. And then you got to push yourself. Yeah. And then, and I learned to kind of trust that I could say a thing and then feel more confident in that. So it's like, you're creating an artificial intelligence when you create an eye on the page that gets stronger when you revise And, you know, I'm from the Midwest, which is why I was kind of asking where you grew up. Because, like, that was certainly my experience was like, I don't know, you don't want to rock the boat. I mean, admittedly, I probably did more of it than I should have. And I kind of messed a bunch of shit up. But it was very much, it's like, I don't know, don't assert yourself. Like, you just kind of, you know, listen. It's just let other people do the work. And it took a while to kind of come out of that and feel like at least, and maybe it's because I'm writing about stuff that seems kind of below other people's notice. Maybe that's like a defense mechanism. Like, you know, I've got that essay about Dawkins in I Will Take the Answer. And it's like nobody gives a shit about Dawkins. So immediately when I'm going into writing about Dawkins, I'm like, all right. I mean, I can say whatever I want about Dawkins because you already assume it's going to be uninteresting or like kind of lame. So I get to like, if I can make you care about Dawkins, then that's a big win for me. And it's kind of how I feel about Predator too. I should say Predator also, because I'm, you know, there may be Predator 2, another memoir coming down the line. But it's like that idea of like, if I can get you to care about this thing that either you care about and don't see my way, or you don't care about it at all. You're like, then I've become like a kind of evangelist for it. And it's like, I want people to care about this thing that maybe they didn't care about before, which requires some strong statements and a willingness to kind of really put yourself out there as an instrument that's going to be fun to play with as we go into the book.
Yeah, well, it is such it's such a fun book, and I had the benefit of like knowing enough about the movie to really read it with that anticipatory eye of like, I'm loving where Anders taking me, and I can't wait till he gets to this point because I can't wait to see what yarn is gonna be spun from that set piece. And it was just such a treat to read in that regard. So I want to be mindful of your time here, and as I like to bring these conversations down for a landing, I love asking the guest for a recommendation for the listeners of some kind. So Ander, I extend that to you. What would you recommend to the listeners out there?
Okay, so I'm going to open this up. You're going to get a little bit of the crackling sound. This is, I would like to recommend a bag of chips.
Nice.
I've been doing a lot of time over the last couple of years, kind of as like a pandemic side project, I guess, like kind of reviewing new chips that I run across. It's a lot of what I do on Instagram as I post reviews of these chips and then various Predator content and occasionally some Assessment Matters stuff. But I'd like to recommend Takis Kettles. Takis are like the kind of like rolled chips that are pretty good. They're kind of extreme, but these are these kettles with a Z. So Kettlez, which is pretty stupid. But they've made a kettle chip, and the flavor is jalapeno typhoon.
Whoa. And
man, these things are really good. They're delicious. I ate like half a bag last night because they're not, you know, I'm not a big hot, spicy person. Like, I mean, I like a little spice, but I like the flavor, and they have this delicious jalapeno flavor, very strong, very salty, but they don't overwhelm. Like, you can just eat a bunch of these chips and just get a nice jalapeno feeling without it blowing up your mouth or your digestion, which is what a lot of chips kind of do. And I really love them. In spite of their stupid name, I would eat any other Taki. I think I had a guacamole Taki when I was in Michigan, and that was really good too. So I guess I'm in for Takis now in a way that I was not before. But yeah, check out the Takis Kettles Jalapeno Typhoon if you can get them where you are, or you could tune into my Instagram for a review that'll probably be happening in the next couple days.
Oh, I love it. It's like the guy who was doing sync reviews on some website, some social media platform. I can't remember what. Now we can tune in for chip reviews. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's a good side project. Like, why not? Again, it's like probably not good for my health. So this may actually, my doctor's like, maybe you should lay off these for a while. But, you know, I mean, got to suffer for my art.
Exactly. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for coming back on the show to talk all things Predator in this book, which is incredible. So, thanks so much for the time. Thanks for coming back on the show, and I wish you the best of luck with it, man.
All right. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks, CNFers. Thanks to Andrew, of course. He's at Anger Monsoon on Twitter and Instagram. The name of the book, again, is Predator, a memoir, a movie, an obsession. It's published by Grey Wolf, everybody's favorite publisher. First person to link up to this episode and tag at CNF Pod on Twitter with the Dutch and Dylan handshake Twitter gif, they will win my copy of Anders' book. The first one I see pops up, first one in the timeline of those mentions, I will reach out to you, get your address, and send you my book, my copy of Anders' book. That's your mission and potential prize for making it to the end of the show and listening all the way through. See, it pays to listen all the way through. You can be rewarded for listening all the way through. Yesterday was my last day as the opinion page editor at the Register Guard newspaper after nearly 3.5 years editing guest views, writing the occasional column when I felt like it, editing letters to the editor. I started the job with, it was always part-time, but it was 34 hours, making $18.50 an hour, which is okay, I guess. I was part of an editorial board with a publisher and executive editor, and I was my technical title, so I didn't get paid too much, was assistant opinion page editor, but there was no opinion page editor, so I was assistant to nobody. That's how I get paid the $18.50. Anyway, then Gannett took over the paper in 2020, yay, dissolved the editorial board, staying on brand, and left me dangling there as the last opinion page editor this paper will ever have. Soon, the opinion section went from 8 pages over 7 days when I started to 4 pages over 3 days, and then quickly after that, it went to 3 pages over 2 days. For a very active and engaged community like Eugene, Oregon, that did not go over well. So the rage was real that I would always feel. What am I to do? I'm like, hey, Gannett. Hours went from 34, like I said at the beginning, then to like 30, then about 20, and to about 15. All the while making $18.50 an hour for the last 3.5 years. So I effectively just was docked. And that's how I avoided the bean counters, I think. It was cheap. Reliable. I had applied for a food and entertainment writer position a few months ago at my own paper, and I felt that I had a real good chance at it. But turns out I was only interviewed as a courtesy. I wore a tie and everything. It was a video interview. I wore a tie, and people who interviewed me looked like they had just come from the gym. Sweatshirts. Didn't care. I was like, oh boy, this will go well. After the interview, I wrote them emails saying how excited I was to try out this new beat and to really hit the ground running. I was like, my brain is like just popping with ideas. After a few weeks, after not hearing anything, I was like, okay, what's happening here? I asked what the status was, and they said they wanted someone with more story ideas and more excitement for the beat. And I was like, that doesn't align with what I had said, and certainly the energy I brought to the interview. I later found out they didn't want to hire someone who was primarily a writer by trade, though, as you know, I'm an audio maven. They wanted someone with more video experience, I think, but more than anything, they wanted to bolster their diversity numbers, and someone of my makeup is not going to do that. So that was the main reason right there, and I get it. I'm not against it, but it does suck when you're very qualified, when you're qualified for a position like that. So that was the beginning of the end for me. I realized I was just some cheap at $18.50 an hour, and that I wasn't going anywhere at the paper. So then Gannett reported really shitty profit margins and then closed all open positions and laid off even more people. I sort of snickered because now there was no food and entertainment reporter position at all to even apply to. And a lot of people who they were going to offer the job to turned it down because they took too long to do it. I think they made a mistake not hiring me. I have institutional knowledge, regional knowledge. I've been here for a while. I've been at the paper. I get the culture. But Gannett loves to hire a young 20-something. They can underpay and overwork them until they take a job in PR. So with no animus towards the people I sort of worked with, because those are kind of really on my own. I left what I call a dead-end job, and boy, was it ever a dead end. Now I'm going to focus on my freelancing and start my own thing. Bought a domain and everything. It's going to be kind of a cool thing. It's going to just start with me. Maybe it'll go elsewhere. Who knows? So hopefully I'll have more news to report on that project in the coming months. The Lance is free, as they say, CNFers. I will be on the road next week driving cross country with the dogs, heading east to help my sister sell my mom's house and see my mom, whose plunge into dementia is escalating. So there will likely be no new episode on October 14th, a week from today. So in the meantime, stay wild, CNFers, and if you can do, interview. See ya.